Across the UK, on DAB digital radio, on the free Times Radio app, and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.
And it's 18 minutes past 5. The front page of the Times says the Tories are divided over the new definition of extremism. Our political reporter will be here in about 15 minutes' time to look at kind of the row as it's developing within the party. The Sun says they have a Celebrity Big Brother exclusive. Uncle Gary's fury at slurs on the royals. This is Princess Kate's uncle. Stay with me here. Gary Goldsmith has hit out at Prince Harry over slurs on his niece and the royal family. This is the news that the Princess of Wales' uncle has gone into the Big Brother house. If you wanted to keep a low profile, that certainly wasn't the way to do it. And The Eye says Tory tensions as Hunt and Sunak wrestle over the crunch budget. Of course, that's coming this time tomorrow. Joining me to go through the papers in a bit more details is Andrew Eborn, barrister, broadcaster and the president of Octopus TV. Andrew, a very good morning.
Very good morning, Rosie. It's always a super Tuesday when I join you.
And there's always many puns, Andrew, it has to be said. Andrew, with your sort of legal hat on, yes, what are the complexities of redefining something as complex as extremism?
Well, that's the problem. And they're talking about this ideology that undermines the rights or freedoms of others. And you've got to balance that with freedom of speech. I mean, Elon Musk, he sort of famously said the point of freedom of speech is allowing those whose views you disagree with to express those views. I mean, Obama himself said we don't want to have people who are coddled and protected from different points of view. At the same time, and Rishi did that very powerful speech about extremism. And around the world, everybody's very concerned about the rise of extremism. But it's a label. And what happens is in Canada, for example, you've got not this online safety bill, but the online harms bill. And they've got the same debate going on there, is that we want to cut out extremism. We want to make sure that the rights and freedoms of others, including freedom of speech, are not undermined. But there is a balance to make sure that we don't basically stifle debate. And I always say, look, it's freedom of speech, but it's not freedom from consequences. And so we need to look at that. And that's where the whole sort of the definition, if you like, comes into play.
Yeah, this draft definition has got to be signed off by the cabinet. It's going to be difficult. As soon as you move the boundaries here, you will inevitably sweep other categories into it. That may be a good thing, but it may have unintended consequences.
No, that's absolutely right. And you have to have freedom of expression. There needs to be people who are allowed to have different views without being swept up. And then when you have a loose definition, you say, well, if everything's labelled as extremism because it undermines others' freedom, or you have an opposing view, then that's very, very difficult. And I think that's the sort of balance that you have to do. As a lawyer, we want definitions. You need to have absolute clarity to make sure you do not restrict those freedoms unnecessarily.
Do you know, the freedom of expression, freedom of speech has all been hotly debated, particularly in the wake of the protests that have been taking place ever since the 7th of October. And it's in part why the government are looking at this legislation. It's raised big questions. You know, we've had MPs, for example, like Tobias Ellwood, that have had protesters right outside his house, which he said was extremely intimidating for him, his family. Inside the Times, an interview that was on Times Radio Breakfast yesterday, actually, with the BBC presenter Chris Packham. He spoke to Stig and Asma yesterday. The Times have written it up this morning, saying Chris Packham said that Just Stop Oil has a right to protest outside the homes of MPs. Do you think, Andrew, it is right that you have freedom of expression, freedom to protest, but that also means, in an intimidating way, outside someone's home?
No, I absolutely disagree with Chris. I mean, he makes a lot of brilliant points normally on other matters. But wherever you have intimidation, and we've got the whole environment where there have been murders as a result of this sort of opposing views and so on and so forth. People are fearing for their safety and therefore not standing again in elections. It's absolutely wrong that you can go to somebody's home and intimidate not just the person concerned, but their families. And I think that is a step too far. And we need to ensure that people are protected. So whilst it's still legal to think, and that's what they say on the T-shirt, think while it's still legal, you need to make sure that people's lives are not sort of threatened in any way. And going to somebody's home, as we had with Rishi Sunak and from Just Stop Oil, and their suggestion that they might be doing more of it is appalling.
Greenpeace protested at the Prime Minister's house in North Yorkshire, and they kind of covered black fabric over his house. He obviously wasn't there, but I think the argument from the protesters, Andrew, would be...
and the other guy,
the argument would be that these politicians' lives weren't at risk.
Yeah, well, and you say that, but where does it stop? I mean, it's intimidation. It's not just that sort of side. The fact that they can, and I've got a picture of it here, which you have in the Times, glorious Times today. No new oil they got on top of that sort of side, and they've covered his home with these black sheets. It's intimidating. And if you've got the young family members or whatever, why should they be subjected to this sort of stuff? Absolutely, freedom of speech, but not freedom from consequences, and certainly not where people are going to be intimidated or fear for their lives.
Front page of the Mail, Andrew, their headline today is Vicars in uproar over Church's £1 billion slavery reparations. Tell us, what's the heart of this? What is the Church paying for?
Well, this is all to do with the basic sort of proposition about what's happening about slavery and so on and so forth. And they announced last year that it was setting up a $100 million fund for reparations to recognise that it once profited from the slave trade. And what a number of people are saying, there was a report which came out yesterday saying that this was insufficient to fully redress the centuries-long impact of the great evil of slavery. And they would call for a much bigger target of $1 billion. Now, slavery was indeed a great evil. The question, however, is the parishioners are sort of turning around and say, well, we're going to be put off donating what a cash-strapped church is, because it sort of gives the impression that there's a vast sums to throw around. So it is that sort of debate. That's the sort of centre issue of it. It's how much should the Church of England give? It's raising that sort of money and everything else. And I think that, as you say, recognise it was a great, great evil. What can be done about it at this stage?
So I think what's going to happen is, according to the reporting in some of the papers, including the Times, is that wealthy families, wealthy investors, they're going to be asked for help by the Church of England to build up that fund. And the fund, they're saying, is to atone for the appalling evil of the slave trade. Do you think it is very difficult, isn't it, to redress wrongs of the past and to put a financial price tag on them? Do you think that, I think the Church have said that actually the £100 million is what they'll be giving. That's sufficient. They're not going to listen to this report, or I think they've taken it into consideration, say it needs to be an even greater sum. Do you think financial sort of repercussions are the right way to handle this?
History is polluted with horrible events, and if you go back far enough, everything that every nation has ever done has been horrible at some stage. The reality is a financial recompense is not going to be sufficient at any sum. It was a horrendous time. It was the great evil of slavery. And as they say in the report, you're 100 million who say, well, this is it, this is sufficient. Well, of course it's not sufficient. And this is why people, as soon as you start to put a sum on it, they're always going to have some sort of backlash.
Now, talk about, this is a sort of slightly less serious, but still important to many people, a bit of a backlash. I wonder what your gut reaction is, Andrew, to this song. What's your gut reaction, Andrew?
Well, the gut reaction is, it's a glorious song. This is what they have a look until you start looking at. I'm assuming that what you played was Rule Britannia. I didn't hear it in my ears.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, it's
that's
Rule
all right,
Britannia.
I'm guessing I can lip read by your wonderful gestures in the studio.
You mean I tell you what kind of stories are coming before we talk about them in the paper review?
I know, we love it. But basically, so there's a fury as a top Labour MP has claimed the patriotic song Rule Britannia is alienating for many Britons. And this was basically, it's a stable, isn't it, of things like Last Night of the Proms. And if you look at the words, it says, Britain never, never, never shall be slaves. And so you're looking at that sort of side. And it is interesting, the whole history of it, because it's sort of written, a fantastic song, which was brought together as sort of Thomas Arne originally composed the music for Rule Britannia.
The debate is going to be,
work,
Andrew,
yes.
is it appropriate for Last Night of the Proms to have this, what some will say, a very stirring patriotic anthem, but others will say what you suggest is going to be talking about our proud history is anything but?
Well, I think it's a celebration song. What they say in many ways, Rule Britannia could be compared to Dee Ream's song Things Can Only Get Better, which Tony Blair used as his soundtrack for Labour's election victory in 1997. So it is a celebration. The fact that it talks about slaves and so on and so forth, that's what people are objecting to. But the reality is, I think it's quintessentially British. It's an essential part of that sort of side, and I think it's wrong, or would be wrong, to ban it.
It sounds like you're with the Prime Minister. The spokesperson for Rishi Sunak said the Prime Minister's very clear that it should continue to be sung and proudly. OK, so that gets a tick from us. I'm not sure, in the cultural realm still, I mean, you can't kind of move around the papers without seeing endless headlines about celebrity Big Brother. It's back after 6 years. You've got people like Sharon Osbourne in the house. I'm not sure I'm going to be tuning in. But the Princess of Wales' uncle, Gary Goldsmith,
it is extraordinary,
has gone in. Why? I beg to think.
Why? There's lots of money involved. Why? Because of exposure. And why? Because he's a gloriously colourful character. Goldsmith, he's the younger brother of Princess of Wales' mother, Carol Middleton. So he does make him uncle to the princess and her two siblings, Pippa and James. He's a millionaire businessman who's made most of his money in recruitment. And if you listen to what he says in his little speech, I'm sure you listened on every word, Rosie. He's had 4 wives. He said he's an absolute nightmare to live with, and he claims every part of me is just riddled with mischief and danger. Well, what a delicious contestant for Celebrity Big Brother. That's what he wants to do. He wants to sort of come out and show everybody what he's really like. That's what he claims. Is it good for the royal family?
I wonder how the palace, the palace might be thinking, gosh, brace ourselves. This isn't what they need with sort of the endless speculation about what's going on in the royal family. I'm sure this won't help. But there we go. True to form, we have reviewed the papers, and that it would be impossible almost to avoid that story. Andrew, thank you so much. As ever, it is a pleasure to be reunited. Andrew, and you're back in a fortnight's time to go through the papers with me. That's Andrew Eborn, barrister, broadcaster, and president of Octopus TV.
Across the UK, on DAB, online, and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.